The world is watching the Cuban regime. If it follows its recent public gestures by opening up access to information and implementing meaningful economic reforms, respecting political freedom and human rights, then it can credibly say it has delivered the beginnings of change. But experience tells us this regime has no intention of taking these steps. Instead, its recent gestures appear to be nothing more than a cruel joke perpetuated on a long-suffering people. America refuses to be deceived, and so do the Cuban people. While the regime embarrasses and isolates itself, the Cuban people will continue to act with dignity and honor and courage. In Cuba, advocates of liberty use this week to honor political prisoners who have sacrificed for the cause of freedom, like the brave writer named Pedro Luis Boitel. On May 17, 1972, while on a hunger strike in prison, Boitel said, "They can kill and destroy my body, but never my spirit. This can never bend." 8 days later, Boitel died. He was 41 years old. We see the same unbending courage in Cuba's political prisoners today. We see it in a man named Luis Enrique Ferrer Garcia. Luis Enrique is a peaceful pro-democracy advocate who was rounded up during the 2003 Black Spring. Luis Enrique received the longest sentence of all those arrested during the crackdown, condemned to 28 years in Castro's prisons. At times, this brave man has been trapped in a dark cell too small for him to stand. He suffers from high blood pressure and severe gastrointestinal illnesses. As his health obviously deteriorates, he has little access to his family. We see this courage in a doctor named Oscar Elias Bisset. Dr. Bisset is a healer, a man of peace, and a determined activist for human rights. For all this, Dr. Bisset serves a 25-year sentence under the worst conditions. He was once put in a solitary confinement for nearly 8 months, trapped in a small, dark underground cell. He lost nearly 50 pounds and has lost almost all his teeth. He's in poor health. He has allowed very few visitors. We see this courage in Cuba's Damas de Blanca. Every Sunday, these ladies in white march in silent, peaceful protest, demanding the release of their loved ones. A few weeks ago, when about a dozen of these women held a peaceful sit-in at a public park, they were dragged from the area by a large pro-regime mob. One of the women was Berta Soler, whose husband, Juan Angel Moya Acosta, is serving a 20-year sentence. Earlier this month, Berta told me personally, despite the torture, Cuba's political prisoners will not give in. Recently, a former political prisoner asked me to remember his brothers languishing in Castro's jails. Through this day of solidarity with the Cuban people, we honor that request by speaking the names of Cuba's prisoners of conscience. They include men I've just mentioned. They include others such as Ricardo Gonzalez Alfonso, Jose Luis Garcia Paneque, Normando Hernandez, Jorge Luis Gonzalez Tanquero, and Ariel Iguidos Sigler Amaya. They include other names that many of you keep in your hearts and in your prayers. These names are being whispered in Cuban cities from Pinar del Rio to Santiago de Cuba. These names are being echoed at solidarity events across the world as people from South America to Eastern Europe demand the release of all Cuban prisoners, political prisoners. Today, these names are being recognized by the nation that will always be a friend of Cuban freedom, Los Estados Unidos. This is the first day of solidarity with the Cuban people. And the United States must keep observing such days until Cuba's freedom. We will continue to support the Cubans who work to make their nation democratic and prosperous and just. Since 2001, the United States has dramatically stepped up our efforts to promote freedom and democracy in Cuba. This includes our increased efforts to get uncensored information to the Cuban people, primarily through Radio y TV Martí. Today, I also repeat my offer to license U.S. NGOs and faith-based groups to provide computers and internet to the Cuban people if Cuban rulers will end their restrictions on internet access. And since Raul is allowing Cubans to own mobile phones for the first time, we're going to change our regulations to allow Americans to send mobile phones to family members in Cuba. If Raul is serious about his so-called reforms, he will allow these phones to reach the Cuban people. Through these measures, the United States is reaching out to the Cuban people. Yet we know that life will not fundamentally change for Cubans until their form of government changes. For those who've suffered for decades, such change may seem impossible. But the truth is, it is inevitable. The day will come when Cubans freely receive information from many sources. The day will come when popular blogs are no longer blocked and broadcasts from the United States are no longer jammed. The day will come when Cuban leaders live up to the international human rights documents they have signed, instead of making a mockery of them. The day will come when Cubans can speak their dissent and change their jobs and leave their country and return to it. And the day will come when they can worship the God Almighty without fear. The day will come when all political prisoners are offered unconditional release. And these developments will bring another great day, the day when Cubans choose their own leaders by voting in free and fair elections. Today, 113 years after José Martí left us, a new post-patriot expresses the hopes of the Cuban people. With this morning is songwriter Willie Chirino. Willie will perform a song that is on the Cuban people's lips and in their hearts. And here are some of the lyrics. Nuestro día ya viene llegando. As I mentioned today, my words are being broadcast directly to the Cuban people. I say to all those listening on the island today, your day is coming. As surely as the waves beat against the Malecón, the tide of freedom will reach Cuba's shores. Until it does, know that you're in our prayers. And know that the author of liberty hears those prayers. Y que con su ayuda venemos a Cuba libre. Gracias y que Dios los bendiga.